The Corinthian War, a complex conflict that unfolded against the backdrop of the power vacuum left in the wake of the Peloponnesian War, pitting Sparta against a coalition of 4 allied states, Athens, Corinth, Argos, and Thebes, supported indirectly by the Persian Empire. Sparked by Spartan expansionism and its hegemonic ambitions in the wake of its victory over Athens, the war represented a significant chapter in the struggle for supremacy within the Greek world. And I bet that you've never even heard of it. Well, maybe you have. But in case you haven't, let's learn all about it. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're coming back, it's good to see you again, and if you're new to the channel, it's great to meet you. If you want to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in the description and comments. Otherwise, if you feel like subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments, well, that certainly helps too. And now, let's get on to the topic at hand. The Corinthian War, 395 to 387 BC. Make yourself comfortable. In the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, which concluded in 404 BC, Sparta emerged with the backing of almost every mainland Greek state and the Achaemenid Empire. Additionally, in the period following the war, Sparta managed to extend its influence over several Aegean island states. This broad support base began to crumble in the years subsequent to their victory, however. Despite the collective effort that led to their triumph, Sparta was the sole beneficiary of the spoils, and tribute payments, of course, from the states that were defeated in the war, and from those who were part of the former Athenian Empire. And if you don't know about the Peloponnesian War, it was Sparta versus Athens. If you want to learn about that, go and watch my Peloponnesian War video. You'll have fun, I guarantee it. Now, the discontent among Sparta's allies grew when in 402 BC, Sparta launched an attack on Elis, a member of the Peloponnesian League, which had incurred Spartan displeasure during the Peloponnesian War. This aggressive move by Sparta was not supported by Corinth or Thebes, both of which declined to contribute troops to the Spartan campaign against Elis. Now, a couple of years later, in 398 BC, when Sparta proposed an expedition to Ionia, Thebes, Corinth, and Athens collectively opted out, with Thebes notably interfering with the Spartan king Agesilaus' sacrificial ceremony on their soil before his departure. Despite lack of support from these key states, Agesilaus, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, perhaps Agesilaus, launched a successful campaign against the Persians in Lydia, even reaching as far as Sardis. At the same time, the Persian satrap Tissaphernes was executed due to his inability to halt Agesilaus, and his successor, Tithraustes, resorted to bribing the Spartans to redirect their campaign northwards into Pharnabas's satrapy of Hellespontine Phrygia. By any means necessary, I suppose. Agesilaus complied, taking the money, while also making preparations to assemble a significant naval force. Now Pharnabazus, unable to defeat Agesilaus' forces in battle, chose a different strategy to compel Agesilaus to withdraw by inciting conflict within the Greek mainland itself. He sent out Timocrates of Rhodes with 10,000 gold darics to distribute among key cities on the mainland, including Athens, Thebes, Corinth, and Argos, with the aim of encouraging them to adopt policies against Sparta. The mission was successful. Money talks, and everybody has their price. As Timocrates managed to sway influential groups in each of these cities to oppose Spartan dominance, which I suppose credit where it's due, money notwithstanding, it's a brave feat to go up against the Spartans. Plutarch records that Agesilaus, well, I'm having trouble with that, aren't I? Plutarch records that Agesilaus remarked as he left Asia, "I have been driven out by 10,000 Persian archers." But he didn't literally mean archers. There were no arrows flying around from the Persians on the Greek mainland, at least not at this point. The statement rather cleverly references the darics, which were cleverly known as archers for their design, indicating that the deployment of such a sum in bribes to Athenian and Theban politicians was what effectively forced him to retreat. The Thebans, already showing a stronger disposition against Sparta, played a significant role in instigating a war, illustrating the extent to which financial influence and politics can shape the landscape of ancient Greece. Now, off to another ancient Greek source. Xenophon recounts that the Thebans, preferring indirect confrontation, incited their allies, the Locrians, to levy taxes in disputed areas that were also claimed by Phocas. This action led to the Phocians invading Locris and devastating its lands. The rather incensed and aggrieved Locrians sought Theban intervention, prompting Thebes to launch an invasion straight into Phocian territory. And the conflict escalated when the Phocians, who were allied with Sparta, called the Spartans for aid. Of course, Sparta were all too ready to answer. Seizing the opportunity to reprimand Thebes, they commanded a general mobilization. Things were about to heat up. Now, in response to all this, Thebes dispatched an embassy to Athens, seeking support against the Spartan threat, albeit they were quite a little bit panicked at this point. They didn't think that the Spartans were going to just jump right in. While the Athenians, aligning with Thebes, decided to sit down and have a vote on what they were going to do. And eventually, with all things added up, they decided to aid Thebes, cementing a perpetual alliance within what was known as the Boeotian Confederacy. Now back to Sparta. Their strategy involved coordinating two armies. One of them was led by Lysander, a very famous general, and the other led by Pausanias, to converge and assault Haliartus, which was a city within Boeotia, and quite one of strategic importance for them. Now, Lysander, arriving ahead of Pausanias, convinced Orchomenos to succeed from the Boeotian Confederacy, and marched with his forces and those from Orchomenos towards Haliartus. Now, when the time came, at Haliartus, Lysander was slain in a skirmish provoked by his forces' proximity to the city walls, and the battle was largely indecisive, marked initially by Spartan losses, but later by Spartan victory over Theban forces, who had pursued them onto terrain that was unfavorable. Now Pausanias reached the battlefield a day later, negotiating the return of Spartan casualties under the guise of a truce, before returning to Sparta. Upon his return, people were a little bit annoyed with his latency. He should have been on time, and it was not a good day to be late. Therefore, Pausanias faced charges for his delayed support of Lysander, and, well, he knew what was going to happen to him if he was found guilty of this, so he decided rather wisely to flee to Tegea and avoid conviction. Smart move. Of course, he wasn't late to Tegea. He certainly made haste there. Now, following these initial skirmishes, anticipation grew on both sides for the escalating wider conflict, and by the end of 395 BC, Corinth and Argos had decided to join forces with Athens and Thebes, significantly strengthening the opposition against Sparta. To coordinate their efforts, a council was established in Corinth to oversee the alliance's strategic decisions. Efforts to expand their coalition were successful, as emissaries garnered support from numerous smaller states, including East Locris, Thessaly, Leucas, Acarnania, Ambracia, regions in Chaldean Thrace, Athmania, Euboea, and Aenis. Additionally, the combined forces of the Boeotians and the Argives managed to seize control of Heraclea Trachenia, further solidifying their position. Now, in contrast to all this, Phocis and Orchomenos remained the sole regions in Greece to maintain allegiance to Sparta, and that's got to tell you something about the court of public opinion. Then again, no one really wanted to live like a Spartan. I mean, they knew about the diet of the Spartans, the treatment of the helots, and even if you were upper class, well, it didn't really count for much if all you were doing was preparing for constant war. A lot of people in general wanted to be like the Athenians. Strong military, sure, but philosophy, art, poetry, that is the pursuits of the upper class, the learned scholars. You can't all be fighting all the time. The widening support for the anti-Spartan alliance prompted a strategic reassessment in Sparta. I mean, they were strong, but fighting the whole of Greece, it's a tall order. Recognizing the threat posed by this formidable coalition, the Spartan leadership resolved to dispatch a considerable military force to confront the allied states. As part of this mobilization, a messenger was sent to Agesilaus, the Spartan king, instructing him to return to Greece, as he was out campaigning in Asia. Agesilaus, who had anticipated continuing his military successes in Asia, received this directive with notable disappointment. Well, heeding the call, he led his forces back towards Greece, crossing the Hellespont and ready to re-engage with this unfolding conflict. Following a confrontation where Thebes emerged victorious against Phocis, the anti-Spartan coalition amassed a large force at Corinth. In response, Sparta dispatched their own army. The opposing forces clashed at the Nemean River's dry bed within Corinthian territory, where the Spartans achieved a decisive victory. Typical of hoplite warfare, the right flank of each army prevailed in battle. The Spartans overcame the Athenians, while the Thebans, Argives, and Corinthians bested their Peloponnesian adversaries. However, as the Thebans, Argive, and Corinthian forces regrouped from their pursuit, the Spartans launched a counterattack, inflicting heavy losses upon them. The coalition forces suffered 2,800 casualties, significantly higher than the 1,100 losses incurred by the Spartans and their allies. Now, the subsequent significant engagement of the war was the Battle of Cnidus, which was a naval battle. During Agesilaus's campaign in Asia, both the Persians and the Spartans had built up substantial fleets. Agesilaus gathered 120 triremes from the Aegean states, appointing Peisander, his brother-in-law, who had absolutely zero naval command experience, as the fleet's leader. The Persian fleet, a joint force of Phoenician, Cilician, and Cypriot ships, was commanded by the Achaemenid satrap Pharnabazus II and Conon, an experienced Athenian admiral, then in self-exile serving the Achaemenids. Following his defeat at Aegospotami. Now, before the battle, this fleet had reclaimed Rhodes from Spartan control in 396. So 2 years after that, in 394, the fleets clashed near Cnidus. Despite fierce resistance from the Spartans, especially around Peisander's ship, they were ultimately unmatched and suffered heavy losses, with many ships either sunk or captured, effectively eliminating the Spartan naval presence. So, after their victory at this Battle of Cnidus, Conon and Pharnabazus proceeded along Ionia's coastline, ousting Spartan governors and garrisons from several cities. Although Spartan strongholds at Abydos and Sestos, along with smaller bases, remained under Spartan control. And despite these successes, Mytilene on Lesbos continued to support Sparta. Now, the immediate aftermath of Cnidus saw various cities, evidenced by numismatic findings, that's coins, if you don't know, forming an alliance with Sparta. And there were some pretty important ones too. It included Rhodes, Knidos, Ephesus, Samos, Byzantium, and Lampsakos, among others, marking a significant shift in the power dynamics following the battle. As Agesilaus's army made its way through Thessaly, it repelled attacks from the local Thessalians, eventually reaching Boeotia. And there it encountered a coalition force assembled by the states of the anti-Spartan allegiance. Agesilaus's troops, primarily consisting of freed helots. Helots was the slave class in Sparta, by the way. Kind of like a feudalistic serf, but a lot worse. And seasoned mercenaries from the 10,000, were reinforced by half a Spartan regiment from Orchomenos, and another half that had been ferried across the Gulf of Corinth. The confrontation took place at Coronea, located within Theban territory, mirroring the earlier Battle of Nemea. The battle's dynamics, of course, saw both armies' right wings achieving victory. The Thebans managed to penetrate the enemy lines, while the Allied forces on their side faced defeat. In response to their broader predicament, the Thebans regrouped to fight their way back to the camp. Agesilaus directly engaged with the Theban forces, leading to a fierce clash that resulted in significant Theban casualties before the survivors managed to break through and return to their allies. Following this engagement and the victory at Coronea, Agesilaus and his army crossed the Gulf of Corinth by sea, making their way back to Sparta. Now, by the end of 394, the Spartans had secured a tactical advantage on land, despite suffering a significant setback at sea. The coalition states, comprising Corinth, Argos, Athens, and Thebes, managed to withstand the Spartan phalanx in open battle. They maintained their alliance, effectively restricting Spartan movements through central Greece. And over the subsequent years, Sparta's military strategy mainly focused on trying to eliminate Corinth or Argos from the conflict. Now, on the other hand, the coalition aimed to sustain their unity against Sparta, with Athens and Thebes seizing the opportunity to expand their influence within their territorial spheres of control. In 393, following their naval success at Cnidus, Pharnabazus and Conon initiated a series of naval operations in Ionia, capturing Spartan allied cities and promoting pro-Athenian and pro-democratic sentiments, pretty much going around convincing people that they were the good guys. Now, despite Pharnabazus' threats, Abydus and Cestus resisted expelling their Spartan presence. Pharnabazus' attempts to subdue these holdouts by devastating their surrounding territories proved to be unsuccessful, prompting him to delegate the task of winning over Hellespontine cities to Conon. Now, Pharnabazus and Conon then decided to establish a base on the Aegean island of Melos, marking the Achaemenids' fleet's furthest western advance since the Greco-Persian Wars. Their presence incited democratic revolutions and fostered new alliances between the islands and Athens. The fleet's subsequent actions targeted Spartan territory directly, laying waste to Phrae and conducting raids along the Messenian coast, likely aiming to incite a Messenian Helot revolt against Spartan rule. The campaign eventually withdrew, mainly due to logistical challenges, and they had heard that the Spartans were coming to get them, so it was probably time to hightail it out of there. Now, continuing their efforts to weaken Sparta, Pharnabazus and Conon seized the island of Cythera, installing a garrison and an Athenian governor. This move effectively made Cythera an Achaemenid-controlled territory, and it disrupted that strategic route between Peloponnesia and Egypt, posing a direct threat to Sparta's harbor on Teanarum. This strategy echoed the unheeded advice of the exiled Spartan Demaratus to Xerxes I during the invasion of Greece in 480. After solidifying control over Cythera, Pharnabazus visited Corinth, providing financial support to Sparta's adversaries and funding the reconstruction of the Corinthian fleet, further amplifying the threat to Spartan dominance in the region. Convinced by Conon that rebuilding the long walls around Piraeus would significantly undermine Sparta, Pharnabazus allocated a fleet of 80 triremes and additional funds for this monumental task. Conon, with this support, played his own role in reconstruction efforts initiated by Thrasybulus in 394, efficiently utilizing the fleet's rowers and Persian-financed labor to complete the fortifications well ahead of schedule. No unions, though, a bit easier. This strategic move fortified Athens, enabling it to reassert control over key Aegean islands like Skyros, Imbros, and Lemnos, where it established its own Athenian colonies. Now Pharnabazus was rewarded for his contributions with a marriage to the king's daughter. But he was recalled to the Achaemenid Empire in 393 and succeeded by Tiribazus as satrap. Meanwhile, Corinth experienced internal conflict between the democratic and oligarchic factions. The Democrats, bolstered by Argive support, expelled the oligarchs, who then, of course, ran straight to the Spartans and asked them for aid. The Spartans, operating from Sicyon, captured Corinth's port of Lechaeum, but failed to secure the city against the combined forces of the Athenians and Boeotians. The following year, in 392 BC rather, Sparta's envoy Antalcidas sought Persian intervention against the Athenian-led alliance, citing Conon's use of the Persian fleet to rebuild the Athenian power. However, a peace conference convened by Tiribazus, featuring delegations from Athens, Argos, Corinth, Thebes, and Sparta, collapsed due to irreconcilable demands and unfair terms, and this led to Conon's arrest by Tiribazus. But it's okay, he managed to escape. Good job. Subsequently, Tiribazus reported back to Susa, that's back in Achaemenid territory by the way, and Struthus, adopting an anti-Spartan stance, replaced him. Spartan commander Thebron, sent to counter Struthus, was ambushed, and he was killed, showcasing an ongoing struggle for influence between Sparta and Persia in the region. Now, Dithridas succeeded Thebron, managing minor successes, but ultimately failing to shift the balance of power in a decisive way. In Corinth, the democratic faction maintained control of the city, while the exiles, supported by Sparta, held the port of Lechaeum, launching raids into Corinthian territory. In 391, King Agesilaus of Sparta campaigned in the vicinity, capturing several fortifications and taking numerous prisoners and loot. However, while Agesilaus was encamped to manage the spoils, Athenian general Iphicrates achieved a significant victory against a Spartan contingent at Lechaeum. Iphicrates' force, primarily composed of light infantry and peltasts, exploited the Spartans' vulnerability to skirmish tactics, eventually routing them and inflicting heavy casualties. Following these events, Agesilaus returned to Sparta, while Iphicrates continued operations around Corinth, reclaiming strategic points, though failing to recapture Lycaeum. His campaigns extended to Phlius and Arcadia, where he decisively defeated the Phliasians and raided Arcadian lands. Subsequently, an Argive army entered Corinth, effectively merging Argos and Corinth by seizing the Acropolis and erasing the boundary markers between the two cities. This merger symbolized a significant political realignment in the region. Now, following Iphicrates' success, major land operations in Corinth all but ceased. However, Agesilaus conducted further campaigns in Argive territory and Arcania, the latter resulting in a Spartan victory and a subsequent peace treaty with the Acarnanians to prevent further Spartan incursions. The following year, 388 BC, Agesilaus led a Spartan force against Argos, conducting raids without facing much direct opposition, but they eventually withdrew due to some unfavorable omens. While the Spartans, who were recovering from their naval losses at Cnidus, regained dominance over the Gulf of Corinth by 392, and following unsuccessful peace negotiations, they dispatched a fleet under Ecdicus to support Rhodes' exiled oligarchs. But they faced a stronger fleet from the democratic states. Spartan commander Teleotius took over it, initiating operations against Rhodes. The Athenian naval response, which was led by Thrasybulus, focused on strategic campaigning in the Hellespont, securing alliances and restoring crucial Athenian revenues by imposing duties on shipping routes through Byzantium. Thrasybulus's command extended all the way to Lesbos, where he secured victories, but he was ultimately killed, not by the Spartans, but by pirate raiders. Bad luck, I suppose. Now back to the Spartans. They appointed Anaxibius as the new commander in the region, who initially succeeded against Pharnabazus and captured Athenian ships. The Athenians, seeking to counter Spartan advances, sent Iphicrates, who eventually ambushed and killed Anaxibius in a very carefully planned attack. In 389, the Athenians launched an assault on the island of Aegina, which is situated a little bit off the coast of Attica. However, their fleet was soon repelled by the Spartans, though the Athenians did persist with their land operations. Under the leadership of Antalcidas, the Spartan fleet made its way east towards Rhodes, but they found themselves blockaded at Abydos by Athenian commanders in the region. Concurrently, the Athenian forces on Aegina faced counterattacks and ultimately withdrew after enduring several months of grueling conflict. The Spartan naval forces, who were now under command of Gorgipas, managed to catch the Athenian fleet by surprise near Athens and capture several of their ships. The Athenians, rather unimpressed by this development, decided to retaliate, and the Athenian general Chabrias executed a successful ambush on Aegina, where he decimated the Aeginians and their Spartan allies. And remember, the Spartan naval force commander, Gorgobos? Well, he didn't last very long, because he was killed in this ambush. Well, following this, the Spartans dispatched Telutias to take command of the fleet stationed at Aegina, taking advantage of the Athenians' lowered defences post-Chabrias's victory. Telutias orchestrated a raid on Piraeus, capturing a significant number of merchant vessels, which they later outfitted to their new purpose. In the meantime, Antalcidas engaged in diplomatic negotiations with Tiribazus, securing a pact that would bring Persian military support to the Spartan side if the coalition refused peace proposals. Now, this shift in the Persian stance was influenced by Athenian support for figures like Evagoras of Cyprus and Achoris of Egypt, who were both in conflict with Persia, prompting a re-evaluation of their strategy towards Sparta. After breaking the blockade at Abydos, Antalcidas defeated an Athenian contingent, and then consolidated his fleet with reinforcements from Syracuse. With this bolstered naval force, he positioned himself at the Hellespont, threatening Athens' grain supply routes, reminiscent of a similar strategy that was used in the Peloponnesian War. Now, faced with this threat, Athens was compelled to consider peace, and a peace conference was convened by Tiribazus in the late 387 BC, and it saw all major parties ready to come to the table and negotiate. Everybody was more than a little tired of it at this point. Now, a decree from the Persian king Artaxerxes proposed new terms, suggesting the cession of Asian cities and certain islands to Persia, while demanding autonomy for other Greek cities, save for Lemnos, Imbros, and Skyros, which would be returned to Athens. Non-compliant state would face combined land and naval warfare from Persia and its allies. So, it was pretty important that everybody would agree on the same terms. So this treaty, ratified by the Greek city-states over the following year under the looming threat of Persian and Spartan military action, became known as the King's Peace. It effectively placed Greece under Persian suzerainty, marking a significant moment of external influence in Greek affairs, and establishing a precedent for a common peace, where all cities were declared autonomous, albeit under Spartan oversight. The disbanding of Theban and other leagues, along with the dissolution of the Argos-Corinth experiment in joint governance, underscored the re-establishment of Spartan dominance. The resolution of the Corinthian War, after 8 years of conflict, just shows the complexity of diplomacy, warfare, and allegiances that were pervasive among the Greek city-states and the Persians whenever they felt like joining in. In the aftermath of the King's Peace, Persia and Sparta, the principal architects of this treaty, capitalized on the strategic advantages that it afforded them. Persia, relieved from Athenian and Spartan encroachments into Asia, solidified its influence over the eastern Aegean. By 380 BC, it had extended its reach, successfully capturing both Egypt and Cyprus, thus reinforcing its dominance in the region even more. while Sparta, on the other hand, utilized its supreme position within the Greek political hierarchy to dissolve any and all alliances or coalitions that it deemed a threat, and there were plenty of them. The autonomy clause of the peace was particularly exploited to dismantle opposition, as seen in the punitive dismemberment of the Mantinea into 5 separate villages. Under the leadership of Agesilaus, who favored an expansionist and assertive foreign policy, Sparta's military endeavors spanned from the Peloponnese to the Chalcidic Peninsula, maintaining its hegemony over mainland Greece until its defeat at the Battle of Leuctra 16 years later. The conclusion of the Corinthian War also heralded Athens' gradual recovery and resurgence as a significant force in the Greek world. With their fortifications and naval power restored, the Athenians looked to re-establish their influence beyond their borders. By the mid-4th century BC, they had successfully formed the Second Athenian League, a coalition of Aegean states, regaining a measure of the power and territory lost following their defeat in the Peloponnesian War. The aspiration for the autonomy of the Ionian Greeks, a cause championed since the onset of the 5th century BC, ultimately saw no further advocacy from the mainland Greek states in the wake of the Corinthian War. This marked a cessation in attempts to challenge Persian authority over the region. Thus, Persia reigned unchallenged over western Anatolia, enjoying a period of peace and stability over 5 decades. Of course, that was until Alexander the Great came along and mopped the floor with them. But that's a different video entirely now, isn't it? Well, that's the end of our history of the Corinthian War. Sorry for pronouncing Agesilaus' name wrong so many times. I'll do the best I can. I'd like to thank my Mega Chat tier patrons, that is Stark Factory, JC, and Jeffrey. Thank you very much for your contributions. If you would like to make a contribution, well, you know what to do. It's in the description and comments. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for listening. Good night, everybody.